Have you ever loved your child so much you gave everything, your money, your youth, your dignity, only to be cast out like a stranger on the most important day of their life? I used to believe that sacrificing everything would keep our family together, until the night I stood alone in the rain and realized I had traded myself away for nothing but contempt. If this story touches your heart, hit subscribe so you never miss another real-life tale of bitterness and hope. Share this video with someone who might be giving too much to people who don't deserve it. And I want to hear from you. What would you do if you were in my place? Leave me a comment below, because your words could be the strength someone else needs to reclaim their worth. I never imagined I'd spend my twilight years alone in this creaky old house in Oregon, listening to the wind rattle the porch swing I once shared with my late husband Walter. Every morning I wake up before dawn the same way I did when he was alive. Habit is a stubborn thing. I shuffle into the kitchen with my robe tied tight around me and fix a single cup of coffee the way he liked it, 2 sugars and a splash of cream, though I don't care for it myself. I suppose I still make it out of respect, or maybe because it feels like he's still here if I do. My name is Martha Reynolds, and I'm 74 years old. Most folks in town know me as the nurse who delivered half their babies back in the day, or the lady who sewed quilts for the church auction every Thanksgiving. I've lived in this house for nearly 50 years. It's full of memories that refuse to fade. The dent in the stair rail where my youngest Eric crashed his toy truck, the kitchen counter, etched with homework math problems, the spot on the living room wall where Walter and I hung our wedding portrait. Sometimes I stand in front of that photo and ask the man smiling back at me if he'd be disappointed to see how things turned out. Walter passed 15 years ago after a brutal fight with pancreatic cancer that stripped away everything but his stubborn spirit. In the last weeks, I slept in a chair beside his hospital bed holding his hand so he wouldn't feel alone when the dark finally came. When he was gone, I poured everything I had left into our 2 sons, Brandon and Eric, believing that was what good mothers did. You sacrifice, you give and give until there's nothing left for yourself. And in those early years, I never questioned it. Brandon, my oldest, was always ambitious. Even as a boy, he'd strut into the living room with his report cards like he'd just won a Nobel Prize. He worked hard, made his way into a respectable career in marketing, bought a shiny house he couldn't really afford, and married a woman I never quite understood. But I was proud of him all the same. When he fell behind on the mortgage, I drained my savings to cover it. I didn't hesitate. I told myself that's what family is for. Eric, my youngest, has a gentler soul. He became a teacher, modest, dependable, the kind of man who remembers your birthday and always stops by with a casserole if he knows you're having a rough day. He struggled financially too, mostly because he cared more about his students than his paycheck. Last winter, when he called to say he was 3 months behind on his car payment, I wired him the money without a second thought. I never told anyone how thin it stretched me, or how many nights I lay awake worrying whether I'd outlive my meager pension. I suppose I didn't care as long as my boys were all right. If you'd asked me then whether I regretted it, I would have said no. But lately, on the evenings when the house is so quiet I can hear the furnace humming in the crawl space, I start to wonder whether my sacrifices were really love or just my fear of being left behind. I thought things might get easier as I grew older. I imagined Sunday dinners with my sons and their families' grandchildren running barefoot through the backyard while I baked pies in the kitchen. But reality isn't as generous as the stories we tell ourselves. Brandon rarely visits these days unless he needs something. He calls me on holidays and birthdays, his voice smooth and distracted, like he's reading off a script. Eric comes by more often, but even he has a life of his own that keeps him busy. This morning, as I sat at the kitchen table with Walter's coffee growing cold beside me, the phone rang. My heart skipped the way it always does when I see Brandon's name on the caller ID. I hoped foolishly maybe that he was calling just to say he missed me, that he loved me, that he wanted to spend time together. I pressed the green button and held the phone to my ear, bracing for whatever this conversation might bring. In that moment, I still believed there was a chance he'd remember who I was before he started seeing me as a convenient solution to his problems. But as soon as I heard his careful, too polite tone, something inside me sank. Even before he said a word, I knew deep down that this call wasn't about love at all. I gripped the phone a little tighter when Brandon cleared his throat the way he always does when he's about to ask for something. I'd learned to recognize that sound. It was the same tone he used when he needed help with his mortgage, when he needed a bridge loan for his new SUV, when he and Lauren wanted to redo their kitchen in imported Italian tile. My heart sank, but I kept my voice steady. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, hoping against hope he'd surprise me. "How are you?" He didn't answer right away. I could picture him in his office, rubbing his temple with his thumb, searching for the words that would make this next request sound reasonable. "Mom," he began in that soft, coaxing tone, "I wanted to talk to you about something important." I closed my eyes. So this was it. "All right," I whispered. "What is it?" "You know, Lauren and I have been engaged for a while," he said. "We've decided it's finally time to set a date." I tried to smile, though no one could see me. "That's wonderful news. I'm glad you two are ready." "Yeah," he went on quickly like he was afraid I'd interrupt. "We've been thinking, we want to do something special. You know, once in a lifetime. A wedding people will remember." I didn't reply. I could already feel my chest tightening. He took my silence as permission to continue. "We're booking the Cypress Point Resort in Carmel. It's right on the ocean, Mom. You should see it, floor-to-ceiling windows, white sand beaches. It's the kind of place you only get married in once." The way he said it once made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. Brandon was always chasing something shinier than he could afford, always convinced he deserved the biggest slice of everything. And I foolishly had been the one to help him believe it. He paused again. I could hear papers rustling in the background. "We've worked out a budget," he said finally. "It'll be around $300,000. My hand jerked. The phone nearly slipped from my fingers. I swallowed my throat, suddenly bone dry. 300,000. I repeated, my voice smaller than I meant it to be. "Yes," he said, sounding almost apologetic. "But that includes everything. Venue catering, live music, photography, a designer gown for Lauren guest accommodations. It's a lot, I know. But Lauren's always dreamed of a wedding like this. Her parents can't contribute much, and I've been stretched thin since the market downturn." He let that hang in the air as if reminding me he'd suffered. I wanted to remind him that Eric had lost just as much and never once asked me to cover his expenses. But Brandon wasn't done. "Mom," he said, his voice lowering to that earnest pitch he knew could wear me down, "I'm asking if you can help us make this happen." I pressed my free hand to my chest as though it would keep my heart from cracking. "Help you," I echoed. "How much help are you talking about?" "Well..." He hesitated, and I could tell he hated having to say the number out loud. We'd need about $200,000 to cover the deposit and the first round of payments. $200,000. It rang in my ears like a siren. That was more than I had left in my entire retirement account. I'd worked 40 years to save that money in case I needed long-term care someday, in case I outlived my health. I wanted to scream, but no words came. "Brandon," I whispered, "that's an enormous sum." "I know." He sighed as if this burden weighed on him more than it did on me. "But you always said family comes first." Something inside me went cold. The way he said it so casual, like it was a given, that I would just hand over everything I'd worked for, like my love could be measured in checks. When I didn't answer, he filled the silence. "Mom, Lauren and I were hoping you'd see this as an investment in our happiness, and in the family. You'd be helping us start our life together the right way. You'd be proud when everyone sees what a beautiful day you made possible." I almost laughed. Proud of paying for something I wouldn't have chosen, of draining my last security to stage a show. But a small, desperate voice in my heart whispered, "If you say no, you'll lose him. He'll resent you forever. You'll sit in this house alone until you die, wondering if he ever loved you at all." He must have sensed my hesitation because he rushed to fill the gap. "Look, I know it's a lot, but Lauren and I agreed, if you can do this for us, we'll handle the rest. And of course you'll be honored as the matriarch. Everyone will know how much you sacrificed." I closed my eyes. Sacrifice. That was all I'd ever done. For Walter, for Brandon, for Eric, for everyone but myself. My throat ached with the words I couldn't quite say. No, I wanted to say it so badly, but the word got stuck. Need to think about it, I finally managed. That's fair, he said, the relief in his voice as bright as a flare. Take your time. I'll send over the budget so you can look it over. As soon as we hung up, I set the phone on the table and rested my head in my hands. My pulse pounded in my ears. I thought about Walter, about all the nights we'd stayed up worrying about money. He would have told me to hold on to what little I had left. He would have told me that love didn't mean letting yourself be used. But he wasn't here to say it, and I was so tired of feeling like I didn't matter. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning in slow circles, feeling the old ache in my chest I hadn't known how to name when Walter died. It was the ache of being needed for everything except love. Around 4 a.m, I got up and turned on the kitchen light. I made coffee even though my hands trembled so badly I spilled grounds on the counter. I tried to picture the faces of my grandchildren, the life Brandon and Lauren were building. I wanted to believe there was something genuine in their request, some scrap of affection under all that entitlement. But deep down, I already knew better. By the time the sun came up, I had convinced myself it would be easier to say yes than to keep feeling like the villain. If I refused, Brandon would pull away for good. He'd resent me. He'd find some way to punish me, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to withstand it. So when he called again that afternoon, I agreed to pay the deposit. His gratitude was warm and immediate. He promised he'd pay me back as soon as they got settled. I knew that was a lie, but I pretended to believe him anyway. Maybe I just didn't want to argue. Maybe I was tired of being the mother who always questioned, always worried. 3 days later, they came by to talk through the details in person. I tried to tidy the living room beforehand, but no matter how many times I wiped the coffee table, it still looked scratched and old. When I opened the door and saw Lauren standing there in her perfect cream-colored coat, her hair pulled back like she'd stepped off a magazine cover, I felt small in a way I hadn't since I was a girl. She gave me a hug that didn't feel like a hug at all, just her arms pressing lightly around my shoulders, her eyes already moving over my house. "Martha," she said in that sweet, silky voice, "thank you so much for agreeing to help. You have no idea how much this means to us." Brandon set a thick folder on my coffee table. "This is the contract for the venue and the list of vendors. Lauren has everything organized." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Lauren perched on the edge of the couch, crossing her legs so carefully I worried she'd wrinkle her dress. She smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I did want to talk about one little thing," she said. I tried to smile back. "Of course. It's about the attire," she said, her tone light, as if this were nothing at all. "We're asking everyone to wear neutral colors, nothing too bright or patterned. You know how photos can be." I looked down at my hands. I'd been planning to wear the navy dress Walter bought me for our anniversary. It was the nicest thing I owned, the one dress that made me feel special. "I was thinking of wearing a dark blue," I said softly. Lauren's lips pinched into something almost sympathetic. "Oh, Martha, I'm afraid navy will clash with the bridesmaids. We really need everyone to stay in the beige and blush family. Maybe something a little more modern." My heart gave a slow, heavy thump. "I see. And no hats or brooches," she added quickly. "I know you like them, but we want a clean aesthetic. Less busy." I stared at her, feeling heat flood my face. It was like she'd taken a needle and poked every tender place I'd been trying to protect. I opened my mouth to argue, but Brandon cleared his throat. "Mom, we just want everything to look perfect. You understand, right? Perfect?" That word again tossed around like it justified every indignity. I pressed my palms to my knees and nodded because I didn't trust myself to say anything else. But in that moment, something shifted inside me. I felt it like a little crack forming in an old wall, small but dangerous, the first sign that everything was about to change. Lauren seemed satisfied. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through a series of dresses. "Here I've saved a few options. You can order them online. Let me know which one you pick so I can update the seating chart accordingly." Seating chart. My stomach lurched. They hadn't even asked who I might want to sit with or how I'd feel being told what to wear in my own son's wedding. After they left, I stood in the doorway for a long time watching their car pull away. The afternoon was cold and bright, the kind of day Walter would have spent cleaning out the gutters while I raked leaves. I wished more than anything that he were still here to tell me what to do, because in that moment, I wasn't sure whether I'd made a sacrifice for love or just let myself be humiliated again. After Brandon and Lauren left that afternoon, I sat in my living room staring at the folder they'd left behind. The papers inside were crisp and bright pages of contracts and glossy brochures covered with smiling brides and grooms. But all I could see was the fine print, the totals circled in red ink, the deposits due, the deadlines written in Lauren's precise handwriting. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff I hadn't even realized I'd climbed. One more step, and there would be no way back. But when I thought about refusing, my stomach twisted with dread. I could already hear Brandon's voice, hurt, incredulous, telling me I was selfish, ungrateful, impossible to please. And Lauren, with her cold little smile, would look at me like I was a burden they had to endure. I told myself it was easier to go along with their plans, easier to be the agreeable mother who didn't make trouble. That's how I'd survived my whole life, by swallowing my pride to keep the peace. But as the days passed, I felt that little crack inside me widening. The next week, they invited me to their house to meet with the wedding planner. I drove over early, hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart thumping against my ribs. I tried to tell myself it would be fine, that maybe Lauren would surprise me with a moment of genuine warmth. But when I stepped inside, it was clear I was only there because they needed my checkbook. Their living room was spotless, decorated in pale neutrals and abstract art that looked expensive but empty. Lauren perched on the couch beside a woman with sleek blonde hair and a tablet in her lap. Martha. "This is Danielle," she said, gesturing with a manicured hand. "She's helping us finalize everything." Danielle smiled, a practiced smile. "It's so nice to meet you. Brandon and Lauren have told me how generous you've been." I nodded, feeling my face flush. "Well, I just want them to be happy." Danielle turned her tablet so I could see a slideshow of the ceremony plans. She swiped through slides, rows of white roses, long tables set with crystal and silver, a dance floor under a canopy of string lights. "We've selected the platinum package," she explained, tapping her screen. "It includes a live orchestra, custom floral arrangements, and a seated dinner with 4 courses. Very elegant. It was beautiful, I couldn't deny that. But it was also extravagant beyond anything I'd ever imagined. "How many guests are you inviting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Brandon cleared his throat. "About 200. Lauren's parents have a large circle of friends, and we're including some of my clients too." 200. My head spun. I opened my mouth to protest, but Lauren was already talking. "We want everyone to feel included," she said sweetly. "And of course we'll make sure you're comfortable. You'll have a good table." A good table. As if I were a footnote to their story. Danielle scrolled to the final slide, the budget breakdown. My stomach dropped. The total had crept up again, $325,000, with another payment due within 10 days. I couldn't help it. My hand flew to my mouth. I didn't realize it would be this much. Lauren's smile faltered. "We talked about this, Martha. Weddings cost money. You can't expect a day this special to come cheap." Brandon shifted in his seat, not quite meeting my eyes. "Mom, you already agreed to help. We've signed the contracts. If we back out now, we'll lose the deposits." I stared down at the carpet, heat rising in my chest. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up with Walter clipping coupons to save a few dollars on groceries. About the years I'd skipped vacations and new clothes so we could pay off the house. It was as if none of that mattered now, as if my entire life had been reduced to a dollar sign. I looked up and found Lauren watching me carefully, her expression tight. "I understand this feels overwhelming," she said, her voice softening in a way that made me feel like a child. "But this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. We want it to be perfect." Perfect. That word again. It made something inside me snap. Eric called that evening just as I was pouring myself a glass of water to steady my nerves. His voice was warm, familiar, a lifeline. "Mom, I heard from Brandon you're helping pay for everything. Is that true?" I pressed the phone to my ear, feeling tears sting my eyes. "Yes," I whispered. "They didn't leave me much choice." He was silent a moment. "Mom, you don't have to do this. You've done enough. I can't be the reason Brandon hates me." I said, my voice cracking. "I can't stand the thought of losing him." Eric sighed. "I get it. But you shouldn't have to buy his love. I didn't know how to answer that, because deep down I was afraid Eric was right. A few days later, an invitation arrived in the mail, thick cream-colored cardstock, embossed with gold letters. I ran my fingertips over the raised print, feeling a strange emptiness. My name wasn't even printed as Martha Reynolds, mother of the groom, just Martha Reynolds. No mention of who I was to them. I set it on the table and went upstairs to lie down, closing my eyes against the hot wave of shame and sadness that rushed through me. That night I dreamed of Walter. He was standing in our old kitchen, stirring a pot of chili on the stove. He looked up at me and smiled the same soft smile he'd given me the day we brought Brandon home from the hospital. In the dream, he reached for my hand and said, "You've given enough. It's time to remember who you are." I woke up with tears soaking my pillow, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. For the first time in a long while, I let myself imagine what it would feel like to say no, to set a boundary, to stop being everyone's safety net. And as terrifying as that thought was, it was also the first time I felt the faintest glimmer of something I'd nearly forgotten: hope. The morning after that dream, I stood at the kitchen sink for a long time, watching the sky lighten through the window. My hands rested on the edge of the counter, and I tried to slow my breathing. A part of me wished Walter really had spoken those words, "You've given enough." Another part of me was terrified he had, because if it was true, if I had given everything, what did I have left? I spent the day moving through the house like a ghost. I folded laundry that didn't need folding, rearranged the dishes in the cupboards, wiped down the countertops twice. Anything to keep myself from sitting still long enough to feel that rising panic. Around noon, I finally made myself pick up the wedding folder again. The numbers glared up at me. 200,000 already committed. Another 125,000 due within the month. And in all those glossy brochures, not a single mention of me, no role, no acknowledgement beyond the dollars I was expected to provide. That evening, Brandon called. His voice was upbeat in that brittle way I'd learned to recognize. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Did you get the invitation?" "Yes," I said softly. "I got it. Great. So I talked to Danielle and she needs confirmation about your attire." "Did you decide which dress you're ordering?" I rubbed a hand over my forehead. "I haven't looked yet." There was a pause just long enough to let me know he was frustrated. "Mom, I know all of this is overwhelming, but we really need everyone on the same page. Lauren's vision depends on the details being perfect." That word again, perfect. I felt my chest tighten, but I swallowed the ache. "I'll look tonight," I promised, even though the thought of scrolling through more pastel dresses made my stomach turn. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen and dialed Eric. He picked up on the second ring, and the relief that flooded me was so sudden I nearly cried. "Mom." His voice was warm and steady. "You okay?" "No," I whispered. "I don't think I am. Talk to me." So I did. I told him everything, how they'd sat me down and laid out the budget like it was a foregone conclusion, how Lauren had decided what I could wear, where I would sit, how much I would pay, how I felt like a checkbook in a cardigan instead of a mother. When I was done, there was a long silence. "Mom," Eric said finally, his voice low and careful. "This isn't love. This is them using you." I pressed a trembling hand to my lips. "I know. But if I say no, if I pull out now, they'll hate me. They already don't respect you," he said gently, "and that's worse." I closed my eyes. I thought of the little boy Brandon used to be climbing into my lap with his scabbed knees and crooked grin. I had loved that boy more fiercely than anything. I still loved him. But the man he'd become was someone I didn't recognize. 2 days later, Lauren called. She didn't bother with small talk. "Martha, I've been trying to confirm your dress order with the boutique, and they said they haven't heard from you." I'm still looking," I stammered. "Well, time is running out," she said crisply. "If you're not able to handle this, maybe we should pick something for you." My cheeks burned. "That won't be necessary," I said, my voice shaking. "I just want everything to be seamless," she went on, that sugary tone back in place. "You wouldn't want to be the reason the photos look sloppy." I bit down on my tongue so hard I tasted blood. "I'll order the dress by tomorrow," I whispered, just to end the call. When I hung up, I pressed my hand over my heart. It was beating too fast, a hard, painful thud. I knew something had to change, because if I didn't stand up for myself soon, I was going to disappear altogether. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a notepad. For the first time, I forced myself to write down what I had left: my savings, my pension, the emergency fund Walter and I had built over 4 decades. Seeing the numbers in black ink made it real. If I paid the remainder of the wedding, I would have less than $20,000 to my name, barely enough to cover a year of bills if I needed care. I thought of all the times I'd put myself last, convinced it was noble, all the birthdays I'd let slip by without celebration, all the little kindnesses I'd given without ever asking for anything in return. I'd believed that was what good mothers did, sacrifice endlessly. But now, looking at those numbers, I wondered if I'd simply taught my son that my boundaries didn't matter. I set the pen down and covered my face with both hands. The tears came hard and fast, but when they were done, something inside me was quieter. I realized that love wasn't supposed to cost you everything. And if it did, maybe it wasn't love at all. In the morning, I called Eric. My voice felt steadier than it had in weeks. "I've made up my mind," I told him. "I'm proud of you," he said softly. "Whatever you decide." I took a deep breath. "I'm going to tell them I won't pay another cent. And I'm going to wear the dress your father bought me." For the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of something I hadn't known I was still capable of: courage. And beneath it, a quiet relief that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to start over. I woke up early on the morning of the wedding with the strangest mix of dread and determination fluttering in my chest. The sky over Oregon was the color of old pewter, promising rain later. I stood in front of my closet in my robe, fingers resting on the smooth fabric of the navy dress Walter had given me. It wasn't beige. It wasn't blush or silver or any of the other pale, soulless colors Lauren insisted would photograph better. It was the color I loved, the color that reminded me of who I had been before all this, before I became a walking checkbook. I thought about the conversation I'd had with Eric the day before. I could still hear the gentleness in his voice as he told me he'd stand behind me no matter what happened, that he loved me whether I spent a penny or not, that he'd come to the wedding not to celebrate his brother's self-importance, but to make sure I didn't sit alone. It was that thought, knowing someone would sit beside me, that gave me the nerve to slip the dress off its hanger and lay it across the bed. My hands trembled as I got dressed, pinning my hair up the way Walter always liked it, simple and neat. When I fastened the little gold brooch at the neckline, I felt something fierce and almost defiant rise up inside me. If I was going to be invisible to them, I might as well do it on my own terms. At 8 o'clock sharp, a hired car pulled into my driveway. The driver, a young man who looked barely old enough to shave, hopped out and opened the door for me with a rehearsed smile. "Morning, ma'am," he said politely. "I'm here to take you to Cypress Point." I nodded, clutching my purse tighter than necessary, and slid into the back seat. As we pulled away, I looked back at my house. My little front porch with the chipped railings, the flower pots that needed watering, the mailbox with Reynolds hand-painted in blue letters. I had never been prouder of anything in my life than I was of that home and the love we'd built inside it. The ride took nearly 2 hours, long enough for my resolve to fray around the edges. I tried not to imagine the look on Lauren's face when she saw me in navy, or Brandon's tight-lipped embarrassment when he realized I hadn't ordered the dress she picked. I reminded myself over and over that it wasn't my job to protect their feelings anymore. I had spent too many years doing that, and I was done. When we arrived, Cypress Point looked exactly as it had in the brochures. Gleaming white columns, rows of windows reflecting the ocean, perfectly trimmed lawns dotted with trellises covered in fresh flowers. Everything about it felt curated, spotless, cold. Inside, staff bustled back and forth, carrying trays of champagne, checking arrangements, smoothing table linens. The main ballroom smelled like roses and lemon polish. As I stepped into the lobby, I realized no one had any idea who I was. They saw an old woman in the wrong-colored dress clutching her purse like a lifeline. I took a deep breath and walked to the reception desk. "I'm Martha Reynolds," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Mother of the groom." The woman behind the counter looked up with professional detachment, then flipped through her clipboard. "Ah, yes. You're in the seating plan. Just a moment." Her brow furrowed slightly as she read. "It appears you're assigned to Table 19. That's in the rear section by the terrace doors." "Table 19." I repeated, feeling something in me go numb. "Is that near the family tables?" She hesitated. "No, ma'am. The head table is in the front near the dance floor." I nodded. I don't know why I was surprised. After all the hints and slights, I suppose this was only the final confirmation. I thanked her, turned away, and nearly collided with Danielle, the wedding planner, who was rushing past with her phone pressed to her ear. "Oh, Mrs. Reynolds," she said, glancing me over with a tight smile. "Lauren was wondering when you'd arrive. The ceremony starts in half an hour." "I'll find my seat," I said. Danielle's eyes flicked down to my dress. I watched her register the navy, the brooch, the fact that I had chosen not to obey. Her mouth twitched, but she didn't say anything. She simply turned and disappeared into the crowd. I wandered toward the ceremony area where white folding chairs were lined up in perfect rows facing an arch draped in gauzy fabric. Soft, classical music piped through hidden speakers. Guests were already gathering, women in pastel dresses, men in tailored suits. No one looked at me. I chose a seat in the very back, folding my hands in my lap. As I sat there, I thought about all the times I'd dreamed of this day. I'd imagined standing beside my son, proud and tearful, feeling like I had helped build something beautiful. Instead, I felt like a stranger at a performance I hadn't been invited to. When the music changed and everyone stood, I forced myself to my feet. Brandon appeared first, flanked by his groomsmen. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, his face tense with the effort of keeping up appearances. Our eyes met for a moment, and I searched his expression for any flicker of warmth. I found none. He looked away almost instantly, as though he couldn't bear to acknowledge me. Then came Lauren. She glided down the aisle in her designer gown, her face radiant with triumph. As she passed, her gaze swept over me, pausing just long enough to take in my navy dress. Her mouth curved in the faintest smile, sharp, satisfied. In that second, I knew she believed she'd won. The ceremony itself was a blur. Vows spoken in polished voices, the minister's solemn pronouncements, polite applause. When it ended, everyone rose and drifted into the reception hall. I stayed seated a moment longer, feeling my knees tremble. Eventually, I made my way inside, where servers were already passing trays of hors d'oeuvres. My table 19, was wedged near the exit between the coat check and a side door leading to the kitchen. The place card read Martha Reynolds in the same gold script as the invitations. No mother of the groom, no title at all. I set my purse on this chair and stood there trying to decide if I was strong enough to stay. Just then, Eric appeared at my side. He looked sharp in a gray suit, his hair combed back, his expression soft when he saw me. "You look beautiful, Mom," he said, pressing a kiss to my cheek. "Thank you," I whispered, my throat thick. He glanced around, taking in the table's location, the fact that I was sitting alone. His jaw tightened. "Do you want to leave? I'll drive you home right now." For a moment I was tempted, but then I shook my head. "No, I'm staying. If only to remind myself I survived this." Eric nodded. "Then I'll stay with you." He pulled out the chair beside mine and sat down, his presence, a comfort I hadn't realized I needed. While we waited for dinner to start, guests came by to offer polite congratulations. Most didn't seem to know who I was. A few gave me the kind of strained smiles people save for awkward situations. No one asked me to stand for photos. No one introduced me to Lauren's family. When the toasts began, I braced myself. Lauren's father spoke first, going on at length about how lucky Brandon was to have found such a capable, refined woman. He thanked everyone who had contributed to this magnificent celebration, but he never mentioned me. Then the best man stood. His speech was peppered with stories about college parties and business deals. He raised his glass to Brandon's success in all things. Still, no one said my name. I don't remember eating much of the meal. I picked at the chicken and listened to the laughter rolling across the room from the head table. Every so often, Brandon would glance in my direction and quickly look away. I wondered if he felt any shame. After dessert, the band struck up the first dance. I watched from my corner as Brandon and Lauren glided across the floor, her train sweeping behind her like a flag. They looked perfect, every detail arranged to project wealth and taste and polish. But all I could see was the emptiness behind it. Halfway through the song, Lauren turned her head, her eyes meeting mine across the dance floor. Her smile was slow, deliberate, victorious. It said everything she hadn't needed to say out loud. "I've taken everything from you, and you can't do a thing about it." I felt something inside me go still. Not grief, not even anger, just a clean, cold clarity. I stood up. Eric's hand closed gently around my wrist. "Mom, I'm leaving," I said quietly. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "I've had enough." I picked up my purse and walked past the tables without looking back, past the waiters carrying champagne, past the guests who didn't notice me slip away. Out the double doors and into the night air, cool and clean and real, in a way nothing inside that hall had been. As I stood on the steps, the music drifting after me, I felt my heart slow. For the first time in years, I was certain I had finally done the right thing. I didn't look back as I walked down the steps of Cypress Point into the darkness. The ocean wind was cold against my face, and for a moment, I let it wash over me, cleansing the last of the shame and humiliation that clung to my skin. In the ballroom behind me, music was still playing. Glasses were clinking, and people were laughing in that glossy, hollow way people do when they're pretending everything is perfect. I pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders and kept walking down the long driveway lined with flickering lanterns. Eric caught up to me just as I reached the parking lot. "Let me take you home," he said quietly, his voice steady, even though his eyes looked stormy. "I'll be all right," I told him, even though my throat was tight. "Mom," he insisted, "you shouldn't be alone tonight." I opened my mouth to argue, but the truth was I didn't have the energy. My heart was beating hard, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was the relief of finally stepping out of a prison I'd built with my own hands. He drove me back in his old sedan, the heater rattling as it tried to keep up with the cold. Neither of us spoke much on the way. Once he reached over and squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, grateful beyond words for the quiet understanding between us. When we pulled up in front of my house, I looked up at the porch light glowing in the darkness. I'd always thought of this place as too big, too empty. But that night it felt like a sanctuary. "Will you be okay?" Eric asked as he walked me to the door. I nodded. "I think I will be, finally." I hugged him tight. He smelled like aftershave and cold air, and when he let go, I felt steadier than I had in a long time. After he drove away, I went inside and locked the door behind me. The quiet settled around me, warm and solid. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the old house creak. Then I took off my navy dress and hung it neatly back in the closet. I smoothed the sleeves as though thanking it for helping me remember who I was. I was making tea in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. For a moment, I thought maybe Eric had come back to check on me. But when I opened the door, Brandon was standing there. His tuxedo jacket was unbuttoned, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. His eyes were red, though I couldn't tell if it was from anger or the drinks he'd been knocking back all evening. "Mom," he began, his voice raw. "What the hell was that?" I took a steadying breath. I was tired, so I left. "You embarrassed me," he said, jabbing a finger toward the street, as if the reception were still there waiting for his performance. "You made a scene. Everyone was asking where you went." "I didn't make a scene," I said quietly. I slipped out without a word. "That's worse," he snapped. "You couldn't just sit there and let me have one day that wasn't about you." A flush of disbelief burned up my neck. "One day that wasn't about me, Brandon. Nothing about this was ever about me. It was always about what you wanted me to pay for." His mouth opened, but no words came. I stepped back so he couldn't tower over me in the doorway. "You told me this was about family, about love. But the second I stopped doing exactly what you wanted, you made it clear I was just an inconvenience." His face twisted. "Don't do this." "I am doing this," I said, my voice breaking in the middle. "Because it's the truth." He looked around as if hoping someone would step in and rescue him from the conversation. No one did. "You know," he said finally, his voice low and tight, "Lauren was right about you. You're impossible to please. You always have to be in control." I felt something go very still inside me. If standing up for myself means I'm impossible to please, I whispered, then maybe you never really knew me at all. He stared at me, his jaw working, but he didn't contradict me, didn't tell me he was sorry, didn't say he loved me. I waited for something, anything that would feel like the boy I'd raised, but it never came. Finally, he looked away, shaking his head. "You'll regret this," he said. "No," I told him softly. "I think I've regretted every moment I spent believing I had to buy your love." He opened his mouth again, but whatever he was about to say died on his tongue. He turned and walked down the steps, the cold night swallowing his silhouette. When the sound of his car finally faded, I closed the door and pressed my hand against the wood. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt, but under the pain there was something else, a clean, quiet relief. I was done, and I wasn't sorry. After Brandon's car disappeared down the street, I stood there in the quiet of my front hall, my hand still resting against the door. I felt hollowed out and strangely calm, like a storm had blown through me and scrubbed everything raw. For so long, I'd imagined this moment would break me, choosing my own dignity over my son's approval. But the truth was, I felt lighter than I had in decades. I walked slowly back into the kitchen and turned off the kettle that had begun to scream on the stove. The navy dress hung neatly in the hall, waiting for me to decide what to do with it. I thought about all the small humiliations that had led to this night, the pastel dress I wouldn't wear, the table hidden by the coat room, the polite applause that never reached me. I thought about the look in Lauren's eyes as I slipped out the door, her smirk of quiet victory. She thought she'd won. Maybe in her mind she had. But as I poured myself a cup of tea and sat down at the kitchen table, I realized I'd claimed something she could never take, my self-respect. The next morning I called Eric. He answered on the first ring, his voice husky from sleep. "Mom, I'm okay," I said before he could ask. "I just wanted you to know." "You sure?" I closed my eyes and breathed in the steam from my cup. "Yes, for the first time in a long while I really am." He let out a long sigh, the kind that seemed to carry months of worry with it. "I'm proud of you." "Thank you," I whispered, my throat thickening. "That means more than you know." After we hung up, I spent the day in a sort of quiet haze. I watered the plants, wiped down the counters, changed the sheets on the guest bed. All the ordinary things that had once felt small, but now felt comforting. Around lunchtime, a delivery truck pulled up outside. A young man in a red uniform carried a large white box to my porch and rang the bell. When I signed for it, I already knew what it would be, the leftover wedding favors Lauren had insisted I might like to keep. I opened the box on the kitchen table. Inside were rows of silver foil boxes tied with ivory ribbons. Each held a tiny jar of imported honey and a monogrammed thank you card from Brandon and Lauren. I picked one up and turned it over in my hands. The words printed in neat, elegant script. "Thank you for celebrating our perfect day." I almost laughed. Perfect. The word didn't sting anymore. It felt meaningless. One by one, I untied the ribbons and set the jars aside. The honey was good enough to keep, but the cards, I fed them into the shredder, watching them vanish in crisp white confetti. That afternoon, I sat by the living room window with a blanket over my knees, watching the rain start to fall. The yard was turning to mud where my flower beds slept under the dirt. A few brave daffodils were starting to push their green shoots through the mulch. It struck me how ordinary it all looked, and how beautiful that ordinariness felt. No orchestras, no $1,000 flower arrangements, no polished speeches. Just the steady rhythm of my life returning to itself. I thought of Walter, how he used to say that decency wasn't something you owed to the world, it was something you owed to yourself. I hadn't understood what he meant when I was young, but I did now. I pulled the blanket tighter and closed my eyes, letting the sound of the rain fill the house. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be simple. Brandon would stay angry. Lauren would spin her stories about how ungrateful I was. But that was their burden to carry, not mine. For once, I didn't feel the need to fix it. In that quiet moment with the storm tapping gently against the window, I realized this was what freedom felt like. Not fireworks, not applause, just the certainty that I could live my life without apology, and that at last was enough. A week later, I was sitting at the kitchen table flipping through the local paper when the phone rang. The caller ID flashed a number I didn't recognize. For a moment, my stomach tightened. I half expected it to be Lauren calling to deliver another polished lecture about everything I'd ruined. But when I answered, it was Keith, my grandson. His voice was quiet but steady. "Grandma." He said, "I just wanted to see how you're doing." I closed my eyes, relief flooding me. "I'm all right," I told him honestly. "Better than I thought I'd be." He hesitated. "Dad's still upset. He says you embarrassed him, that you walked out to make a statement." I swallowed, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. "I didn't walk out to hurt anyone," I said softly. "I left because I had to do something for myself, maybe for the first time in my life." There was a long silence. Then Keith let out a slow breath. "I think you did the right thing," he said. I saw how they treated you. It wasn't fair." Something inside me cracked open at those words, as if a window had finally been unlatched. "Thank you," I whispered. "Can I come visit this weekend?" he asked. "I'd like to spend some time together." Tears blurred the print on the newspaper. "Nothing would make me happier," I said. After we hung up, I sat there for a long while, hands folded around my mug. The rain had stopped, leaving the yard glistening. My daffodils had pushed higher overnight, their green tips sharp and determined. I thought about everything I had been afraid of losing Brandon's approval, being labeled ungrateful, ending up alone. And I realized the worst had happened. He was angry. Lauren was surely telling anyone who would listen that I was impossible. But here I was still breathing, still standing. And I wasn't alone after all. That weekend, Keith arrived with a bouquet of daisies and 2 big paper bags from the deli in town. We sat in the kitchen and ate sandwiches, talking about his college classes, his plans for the summer. He didn't mention the wedding again, and neither did I. It didn't need rehashing. When he left that evening, he hugged me tight. "You're the strongest person I know," he said. I pressed my cheek to his shoulder, my throat thick with gratitude. "I'm just finally learning not to be afraid," I said. And as I watched him drive away, the porch light spilling onto the dark yard, I realized that was true. The fear had been the only thing keeping me small all these years. Now it was gone. Looking back on everything, I realized the most important lesson I learned was that love should never cost you your sense of self. For so many years, I thought being a good mother meant sacrificing without limits, giving my time, my savings, and my dignity, if that's what my children asked. But standing alone outside that wedding hall, I finally understood that respect has to go both ways. You can pour your heart into raising someone, but in the end, you can't buy their gratitude. It's never too late to draw a line. Even if you're 70 or 80, you deserve to be treated with decency. No event, no relationship, and no perfect photograph is worth losing your peace of mind. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply say enough and mean it. If you've ever felt invisible or unappreciated by the people you love, know that you're not alone. You are worthy of respect, just as you are. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself, even when it was painful? Leave a comment below and share your story. And don't forget to subscribe so you can join me for more real-life lessons and reflections.